A father who vigorously shook his baby son to death has been jailed for life with a minimum term of 14 years. I'm absolutely gutted to say another child murder. Absolutely shocking. And I don't know if you guys agree. These sort of cases are starting to make their presence in the papers, in the news, more often than we would like. So firstly, I would like to discuss this case with you. So, Bradley Thomas, 23, of Redcar, fatally injured 3-month-old son, Emerson Oak Thomas, in the early hours of the 5th of October 2025, and then lied about his actions, Teesside Crown Court heard. Thomas claimed his son was injured falling from his lap, but prosecutors said the injuries were akin to a car crash or 3-storey plummet onto concrete. Thomas was found guilty of murder and given a life sentence with a minimum term, with the judge saying he had denied his son a life. The trial jury had heard Thomas, a window cleaner, perform the night feeds for his son and had got up with him at around 2 o'clock in the morning on the 5th of October, taking him to their living room. At about 5 o'clock in the morning, he took a video of his son, who was 3 months and 16 days old, wheezing and having some kind of seizure, but did not call 999 until half an hour later, when he had woken his partner for help. The baby was clearly in distress and being vigorously and forcefully shaken, but Thomas failed to get immediate action for his son. Emerson's injuries were so catastrophic death was inevitable, but Thomas did not know that, apparently. He lied to everyone, frustrating any potential treatment for his son. The court heard Emerson's mother, who spoke in support of Thomas during the trial, had declined to make a victim statement. In mitigation, Nicholas Lumley, King's Counsel, said Thomas had been a loving father and nobody can believe he did what the jury found him to have done. Mr. Justice Sheldon, King's Counsel, said Thomas shook his son with such violence and force he was caused severe and irreversible brain injuries. Emerson was declared dead at Newcastle's Royal Victoria Infirmary 3 days later. The judge said Emerson was a healthy baby with a lovely smile, who had already brought so much joy to his family. He had his whole life ahead of him, but Thomas denied him of that life. The judge said Thomas had been a loving and caring father, but he shattered the idyllic life he and Emerson's mother had built together. Thomas knew far more about what had happened than he told those trying to save Emerson's life, with Thomas's lies as a result of panic, shame, and an attempt to avoid any blame. Even at the trial, when he was confronted with a considerable amount of high-quality expert evidence, Thomas did not face up to the truth and instead maintained it was a freak accident. The judge said he was sure Thomas was exhausted and became frustrated when his young son would not settle or take his bottle. "You lost your temper," the judge told Thomas, adding, "For a minute or so you shook Emerson with so much force it caused him fatal injuries. You regretted what you had done immediately afterwards. You hope Emerson would recover, but tragically that did not happen." The court heard Thomas would have to serve 14 years minus the 279 days he has already been incarcerated for before he could be considered eligible for parole. I'll let that sink in for you guys. Another tragic, horrific and despicable crime, again against a defenseless child, a 3-month-old baby. I'm a father myself. I've raised my son. He's now 5 years of age. I had to get up in the night with him. I've had to feed him. I've had to burp him on no sleep. And I'll be quite frank, I don't remember the first 4 or 5 months of my son's life because I was that exhausted. It never once crossed my mind to even think about the thought of even considering shouting at him, let alone doing something half as bad as what this little animal has done. And unfortunately, I'm seeing it in the news so much. These murders and attacks on children, it's just becoming more and more common. And I want you guys to have a little rattle around in your brains to maybe offer a reason why this may be. Because I've tried to understand why are so many children getting hurt, getting killed. I've been reading the news for years. I've always been into catching up with the news and being up to date, but it's only the past maybe 5 or 6 years since around the COVID era that I'm seeing all these child murders, these child attacks on children, attacks on vulnerable people occurring all the time. And to be quite frank, I don't think the UK justice system, i.e. the Sentencing Council guidelines, are equipped for such crimes. Yes, there is guidance and sentencing ranges that they can apply, but sentencing has to be a form of retribution and deterrence. But as you can see, it's not been much of a deterrent. It really isn't. And I would like you guys in the comments to maybe put your thoughts across as to why we're seeing cases like this happening more and more frequently. And as a father, they're very difficult to read, but as an inquisitive person, I would like to investigate why this goes on. Because if we understand why, we'll therefore maybe be able to think about what we can do to prevent this. Because I always have the impression that every crime is preventable in some way. Even if it's not clear at the time, it is preventable in some way. And any crimes against children, of course, they are the most preventable crimes, because children don't ask to come here. Do you remember asking to come here when you were a baby, when you were a child? No, no child asks to come onto this planet. And we owe it as fathers, as carers, as guardians, we owe it to them. We are indebted to children to give them love, care, and attention. That is our job, that is our duty. But why are so many parents failing in that duty to this awful level? And I like to make a reference to one of my other videos regarding that monster Jamie Varley and his partner. The death penalty again comes across my mind. I'm not saying that it's 100% okay. I'm not saying it's, that is the foolproof solution. There's much more to it. It's a very complex and controversial issue. But for cases like this, I cannot help but think this is what they deserve. But then again, I'm battling with the humane side of me at times, where I think, well, we're no better than murderers if us as a nation kill people. But there needs to be some form of deterrent, because unfortunately the sentencing guidelines available are not deterring people. Yes, of course, crimes will still take place, but if we can reduce the numbers, even by one case, this whole exercise of reforming the sentencing guidelines will have been worth it. But yeah, another sad case. I was actually going to do a video more on the content that I like to do regarding post-conviction, post-prison release, the sort of things offenders face, the judgments, what offenders can actually do to get their lives back on track, with education, employment, housing, navigating the ways around going abroad, for example, buying homes, That's the sort of content I like to do, and I was going to do a video about that today, but I noticed this on BBC News, and I just had to, pardon me, but have a vent and try and engage with you guys. I've seen the comments that he's been putting in my last videos. Very educated, very, very well thought. And I thought, who better to answer this question of why are these horrific crimes against children happening? Who better to ask and put the world to rights with than you guys who subscribe to my channel and watch my videos? But yeah, this was a fairly quick one compared to other videos I put on. I would like to know your thoughts, and if any of you people do have any sort of suggestions, or even, for example, would suggest a petition, something I can get in front of Parliament, things like that. I'm all ears. I'm not saying I'm going to be the leader, I'm going to be the face of such a movement, but I think what the stuff that you guys suggest is top draw, and it's something that you can't get out of a book, you can't get out of Google. It's something that your public, the great British public, and people from abroad as well, your thoughts and the way you think as human beings, as nice human beings, yous are the voices of reason. That's my opinion. Yous are the voices of reason. If anything is going to change in the future with regards to awful, despicable nastiness like this, it's people like you that are going to bring about that change. And I do want this channel to be more positive things. How can we, prevent crime and reoffending and getting people who have made mistakes, not people like this. People like this are write-offs in my opinion. But how we can get people who make mistakes to better themselves and move on and be allowed to move on. That's the sort of content I do want to focus on. But yeah, this was a rant. This was a rant. But I try to give my head a wobble, think about what sort of thing us as a nation can do to prevent this, and I just couldn't. But before that, I want to understand why these cases occur, and I just can't think of why. I can't think of a plausible reason why someone would do this, unless they're obviously unwell. But then again, I'm not a psychiatrist. I can't diagnose such things. So I'd just like to hear it from you guys. What do you think? Why is this happening? Why is this becoming a more of an exponential growth in awful cases against children? That's what I want to know, and I'm all ears. But yeah, this guy Bradley Thomas, 14-year minimum, definitely not long enough at all. I know there's people who been done for drug trafficking, things like that, who've got much longer. 14-year minimum is not long enough. There's no guarantee he'll get released. He might stay in for 20 years, he may never get out. But you're giving him that hope of potentially being released after 14 years. Doesn't deserve it. But that's going to be a long 40. If he does get out after 14 years, it's going to be a long 14 years for him. He will not be the same person. He'll be living his life on vulnerable prisoner wings up and down the country, with all sorts of stuff put into his food from the cons in the kitchen. He will eventually be set upon and get served up a bit of prison justice. That I can almost guarantee. So it's going to be a long 14 years for him. And does he deserve it? Absolutely. And the rest. But yeah. Thank you guys for tuning in. And like I've said 100 times, I appreciate your feedback. Appreciate your thoughts on this. So please drop a comment. And if you haven't already, if you want to see not so much content like this, but unfortunately the way where I'm seeing the country going, this is the sort of content you will see from time to time. But if you do want to hear more from my channel, more positive things, more content based on rehabilitation, more content based on how we can reform certain parts of the justice system, then just drop a follow, drop a subscribe, but if you don't want to do that, fine, just get involved in the comments, and that is more value to me than anything. But yeah, thank you very much. Peace and love, guys, and I will be back very soon.